Good morning. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Shout out to people that are here with me. I hope your week is off to a great start. And if you're up on the replay, good morning, good afternoon, or good night to you, depending on whenever you watch this. So, I wanted to talk about this topic. Now, I've talked about this on my old channel, but I don't know how in depth I went. And of course, that video is no longer here anyway, so I don't remember what all I talked about. And so I thought it would be a good time to revisit this topic. And what made me think about this topic was on Saturday, I had to give a couple people that work. So, I wanted to come in and drop a little bit of knowledge, okay? And hopefully it will help, anybody that comes across. So I want to talk about a couple things first. So you might be like, well, how is she going to talk about this? Well, I have a lot of experience working with kids and families. I've been doing that for about over 7 years now. In addition to doing general mental health, I also do behavioral health and trauma therapy. So I've had the opportunity to work with tons of kids and tons of families, and I've learned so much. And I know people might be like, well, are you a parent? Well, I'm not a parent yet, but, this is what I always tell people back when I would do a certain type of therapy. Like, when you go to the doctor, does your doctor have to have the medical ailments that you have in order for them to qualify to be helpful to you? I don't think so. So, so hopefully you can walk away with something. Also, I want to be clear before I start that this is not meant to judge parents who do use spanking or physical discipline. Some parents choose to do that. That is their choice. If you do that, the information that I'm going to provide, hopefully it will help you to be safe and your child to be safe. So I just want to make that clear. Even though I am not pro physical discipline, that doesn't mean people who do it are wrong or bad, because there's ways to do it and not be abusive. So hopefully what I hope you get out of this is we're going to talk about spanking, aka physical discipline, how it differs from abuse. And then we're going to talk about like the unique relationships like foster parents. We're going to talk about other tools you can use to discipline your kids. And I'm going to talk about some other things that I think kind of cause some of these issues. So first thing I want to say is I've worked I've had the blessing of working with a lot of Black families, some Hispanic families as well. And so, for many of us, even though we know that all like cultures and races use physical discipline, I think it's very heavy in our community. Whether you're Caribbean, African American, for a lot of people, not everybody, but it's a big part of the way parents choose to discipline. And that, again, once again, not everybody is out here, beating up their kids and abusing their kids. There's different ways to do it. But, I'm really glad for some of the ways that I was raised. Like, my mom did use physical discipline with us, but she really didn't use it a lot. She really didn't use it a lot because, she grew up at a time where a lot of abuse happened. And it was just so normal to get beat for just stupid stuff. So, she didn't want to do that with her kids. And so I'm glad about that. And the times that I did get beat, child, yes, let's just say I learned quickly. So, that's, especially in Caribbean culture could be super duper harsh depending on, who you grow up with and what they believe. Like, they don't play games. Like, I think I remember, like, even in school, you would get hit. And I did go to a private school, so I don't know. Like, yeah, I remember though them hitting you with the ruler. So, it was no joke. So anyway, I wanted to give that piece about culture, but one thing I think, my theory, and this might be offensive to some people, why I think that is so prevalent in the Black community is I think those are the effects of slavery. I think that, when you think of slavery and how our ancestors got the shit beat out of them, horrific beatings as a way of forcing them to comply, I think that a lot of that has instilled a lot of fear. And I think a lot of, I did a book club reading before on Ta-Nehisi Coates. And he talks about this, how like, Black people, they're so terrified for their kids and their kids' bodies because they know what can happen and what's out there, that they would rather be the one to hurt their kids or discipline their kids in a certain way so that they don't have to find out from somebody else. And it was like so powerful. But also like, it's a lot for you to think about. So I would recommend that book for sure. But yeah, I definitely think there's a lot about slavery that's also ties into that. Again, everybody does it. Every race, does it. But, for some reason, it seems like I'm talking about the Black community because that's who I am. I think that there's just a lot of it. And the reason why I'm so passionate about it is I saw so many families who didn't understand that there are lines to the way you physically discipline your kids. And so they would end up losing their kids. And most of these people weren't bad parents. Okay. I had come across some people that are a little sketch-magetch, but for the most part, most of these people were good parents and they just went too far. And so I also like to do this because sometimes people just don't know. They just don't know. I'll give you guys a story. When I was working at this one job when I was still in the States, I had an Indian family that were my clients. I saw her son. And one day she was in the waiting room. I guess she was waiting to see me. And my boss told me the story that I guess the lady started popping her son or whatever. And there was a whole bunch of white people that were like in the lobby. And so I don't think she was like harming him or like, abusing him. But because of whatever was going on in that situation, I don't think she understood, like, you can't do this stuff. Like, you can't do this in public. I don't think she was like harming her son. I think she was just physically disciplining him. And this one lady was crying and terrified. And she was telling my boss, and she was like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. So my boss told me about it because there's no way I would have known because I'm in my office waiting to probably with another client. So she told me about it later. And I actually sat down and I talked with that client. I was like, look, I don't think you're abusing your child, but let's talk about what's appropriate in public. And also, I checked in with her about like discipline and things like that, because again, I'm never going to tell you what to do unless I think it's harming your child. But I also don't want you to end up in a situation where, somebody calls CPS on you unfairly because this is how you choose to discipline your child. It's just, even though the child won't get removed, who wants to deal with that, right? Who wants to deal with that when they just need to understand the culture is different? So let's get into it. Let's talk about spanking or physical discipline. So, what is appropriate physical discipline? A lot of people don't understand what appropriate physical discipline is. The first thing is you are supposed to use an open hand, not a balled up fist, not your elbow, not your foot. Again, I know I'm saying some really extreme things, but so many people grow up in so many different situations. An open hand is what you're supposed to use if you're using spanking or physical discipline appropriately. Punching your child is not appropriate. Pushing them into the wall is not appropriate. None of that. I don't understand. And so the other thing is that's really shocking is you are not supposed to really be using objects. And a lot of people grew up with their parent using objects. You shouldn't be using a belt. You shouldn't be using a switch or, any of that stuff. And the reason for that is that leaves marks and bruises. That's when harm could actually be done to the child. So you want to avoid objects. And again, every state has its own laws. I'm pretty sure in many states you are allowed to spank. But again, look up what spanking is in your state because it's very clear. So you don't want to be leaving. If you're leaving marks and bruises, that's considered abuse, even if that was not your intention. Even if your child bruises easily, you should not be leaving marks or bruises on them because that's considered abuse. Also, you don't want to be spanking your child when you're in a fit of rage. Sure, you might be frustrated. Sure, you might be angry, but that creates a situation where the child could be at high risk for abuse because you're mad and you can't control yourself and you could lose control and end up going too far. Also, that's very scary for the child, even though the purpose is to deter them from bad behavior. If you're in a crazy fit of rage, just, that actually has a lot of impact on you. Think about it. If you've been physically disciplined, if your parent was like, let's say it was one time that they were just so mad, and that shit is mad scary. It's very scary. So the other thing with spanking or physical discipline is you should be communicating to your child why they're getting spanked. Okay, and this is another way you can tell when people are abusing their kids, because there are some people who hit their kids for any and every little thing. And most of the times, if it's like a true abusive situation, they're not really telling them, this is why I'm doing this. This is why you shouldn't be doing this. It's just constantly hitting their kids, right? So communicate to your child why they're getting hit so that they understand the behavior that you're trying to, extinguish. The other thing is, this is a big one. If you do use spanking, use it in moderation. You shouldn't be using that for everything. You should have other tools in your tool bag. And this is another thing I see in our community. For the people who do spank, that is often the only, or not the only, but the main punishment or consequence that they use for their kids. That should be used in moderation. It's actually, even though I have qualms about the effectiveness of it, it's more effective if you're not overusing this technique. Same with any technique. So that being said, we're going to talk about, the bad side of things, but I want to make it clear, I really, really advise and encourage people to use other discipline techniques other than physical discipline, because we're going to get into how some of, the cons of physical discipline. Okay. So remember, if it leaves a bruise, if it leaves a mark, that is abuse. That is not spanking. So physical discipline, we're going to talk about the cons. Okay. So the first thing is that physical discipline could instill fear as a means of changing behavior. Now, obviously, that's the point of it for many people, but you really want to think about that. Like, what are you really teaching the child? What are you, how are they going to apply this to their life and other situations? So you're using fear as a means of changing their behavior. And so maybe that could be a positive thing for getting them to stop certain things you don't want them to do. But, how does it affect them in other ways? Like you really have to consider that. The other thing is, this is a big one, and I have seen this, guys, because again, I've worked with tons of families through the years. Some kids might learn to use violence as a way to solve their problems. When you're getting physically disciplined, okay, especially because a lot of parents are doing this when they're in a fit of rage, okay, you're teaching the child that this is how you solve your problem. Somebody get on your nerves, just punch them. Or, well, they shouldn't be punching them anyway, but somebody get on your nerves, put your hands on them. Not everybody, this isn't necessarily everybody where this happens to, but for a lot of people, that is the case. Like, the kids are learning you're using violence or you're using aggression to solve your problems. This can also result in kids being more aggressive. People don't realize that. It can increase aggression in children. This is why you end up seeing some kids, even though it's wrong, later on they end up hitting their parents back or just doing crazy stuff. And really, if you think about it, they're just mirroring the behavior that you're doing to them. I know that's hard for some people to wrap their minds around because they're like, oh, it's a kid and they should stay in a kid's place. But again, if you're spanking your kid, up until they're 13, you're asking for problems, okay? And I really think that's another thing. You should not be spanking your kids past a certain age. I can't say what that age is, but I do know that after a certain point, you really shouldn't be spanking your kid if you decide to use spanking, because again, it increases the risk of like abuse. The aggression could be a problem, and it could just end up being just a very slippery situation. So yes, you can see more aggression in kids. The other thing is this is a high risk. When you're using physical discipline, when you're spanking your kids, I talked about this already a few minutes ago. There is a higher risk of actually crossing the line of abuse if you're doing it when you're very angry. And this is where I think a lot of people get in trouble. Some of the parents I've worked with over the years, I had one mom who she ended up, her kids were removed because her daughter tried to start a fire. And, obviously the child needed help, but, the mom she severely had beat that child, and the child was removed from their home. Now let's, if we put on our empathy hats, we would know that, okay, of course the parent's going to freak out that the child set a fire, because they could be hurt. The parent could be hurt, the child could be hurt, the siblings could be hurt. You would lose your home. Like, there's so many things that I could totally understand why this parent would get upset. But however, even with all that, it's still not okay for you to have done what you did. So she crossed the line, and this kid, it was in bad shape, and her child was removed. And it was sad because I can tell she didn't understand. I think because of the cultural implications, I don't think she really understood, like, this is why you don't have your child. I get it. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be pissed. You're allowed to be worried. And I don't think people validated that for her. I think people just told her, well, you just did this and da da da. And she needed to hear, yes, it's normal for you to be angry that your child tried to set a fire. However, now that we're looking back and working through this, let's talk about how you can handle her behavior moving forward when you do get her back, because stuff is going to come up. And, I don't know what ended up happening with that child, because I worked with her for a long time, and then I ended up leaving that job. So she went to another therapist, but it's never, black and white like people think. Not everything is black and white, So anyway, we have to think about the risk of causing harm, not because you're a monster, but because we're human beings and everybody can lose control. And the other thing that's very serious here is, in some cases, when you're using physical discipline, the reason why it can cross over into abuse is that you have to increase the intensity for some kids. Some kids, they're tough as nails, and, they might not be affected by your spanking. Or if they did, it doesn't really change their behavior. People have to understand that too. And so for kids like that, those are the kids that are at higher risk for abuse, because then the parent thinks, okay, I have to ratchet up what I'm doing to make this effective. Next thing you know, this child is being put into hot water. This, all kinds of horrible, evil shit is happening because you lost control, and you're not learning the lesson, like, oh, maybe this isn't effective. But because we're so gung-ho about putting our hands on kids, we think, okay, well, no, I just need to, go harder. I need to go harder. And, there was a little boy that I saw, and he was literally like I think he was dumped in hot water. I think he was put in a hot bath, and he had really bad burns, like horrific trauma. And that kind of shit is just like, no, that's like when you cross a certain line, I don't have any compassion for you. Like, you don't deserve to have that child in your care, because again, I can see somebody, getting mad, losing control, and it's not something that happens a lot. Again, you have to consider that people are human beings. But to me, you have to actually take multiple steps. You got to run that hot bath. What was your intention? Just crazy stuff that people are just evil and deplorable sometimes. But like I said, in my experience, most of the times that's not the reason for people abusing their kids. They don't understand. They don't have other tools. And, they think it's their child, so they can do whatever they want to the child. No, you cannot. No, you cannot. Not if it's causing that child harm. You can spank your child, but you can't be beating the shit out of your child. So that's what my thoughts on physical discipline, how it can cross over into abuse. That's why I don't think it's effective, because it could be, I really don't like to see, you have to think about it, guys. A child being removed from their home of origin is also a trauma, even if the child needs to be removed, right? Even if they need to be removed, it still causes attachment issues. It still causes a rift in the relationship, in their development, especially if the child is really young, like under a certain age. Like, the younger they are, the more they're going to be impacted by being removed from their home. And so that's why I really like to do this kind of work with families, to say, okay, you use spanking, no judgment, but let's talk about, if I think they're at risk. I don't do it with everybody, but if I suspect the parent is doing a little bit too much, then I might go through some of these things with them. Because again, and especially if you come in, I've worked with a lot of foster parents, and I've worked with a lot of parents, biological parents, who've had their children removed from their care. So part of my job was to help reunify them through therapy, right? Like, if it's appropriate. In some cases it's not appropriate. Like, if you were out here sexually abusing your child, oh hell no. You're not getting your child back. Okay. So anyway, now let's get into other things that we can do instead of hitting children, instead of, using physical punishment. So some of the things I'm going to talk about, they're going to be a very concise version of what I actually teach the families that I work with. So you'll hear things, and they might sound very basic, but there's so many, each of them could be a video within themselves if you really know how to do it. So I'll try my best to give examples in hopes that it could be helpful to people. So the first thing, which makes a lot of people roll their eyes, especially Black parents, okay, is ignoring behavior that is not dangerous or destructive. Notice I didn't say ignore everything. You can only ignore behavior that is not dangerous or destructive. If it's not causing harm to your property, if it's not causing harm to something that they own or somebody else, if they're not in physical danger, or they're not putting you or other people in physical danger, some things could be ignored. And this is one of the biggest things when I would do a special type of therapy. When I had some of my Black families, I'm telling you, the looks that I used to get, they'd be like, child, you could just tell they're like, this is a bunch of bullshit. Like, they would just look at me like I was crazy. Like, what you mean ignore them? And then, you know what, guys, if there are things that those parents refuse to ignore, I work with them, because once again, I'm not the authority figure in their home. I'm just there to help and support them. So if you truly believe this is something you can't ignore, I'm not going to tell you, I'm going to try to like give you the rationale. But if you decided, no, not in my house, I'm going to respect that. Okay, that's something I'm going to respect, because it's not my home. But remember, there's a lot of things you could ignore. Hey, Andrea, good morning, love. It's good to see you. Okay. I know I scheduled it a little late, so people probably didn't realize. Thanks for being here. But parents used to look at me crazy when they're like, ignore. So I'm gonna give you an example, right? Let's say you told your daughter to go put this box on the shelf, and your daughter picks up the box, okay, and stomps over to the shelf and slams it down. And the parent is like, what the hell's going on in my house? They over here stomping, they slamming the box down. But as a behavioral therapist, what I would say is the child did what you told them to do. They did, in fact, put the box on the shelf. Now, if you can look past that, you have to think about, why is the child acting like that? Why are they huffing and puffing and stomping, and doing the most? Did the contents in the box get broken? Did anything fall out? No, that is probably something you can ignore, even though it sounds annoying as hell, even though you probably be like, no, you need to get popped, or you need to go in timeout, or whatever. Some things you have to ignore because the child is obviously doing that. Hey, pretty kitty, we'll scratch you. Good morning. Oh, I'm about to read your comment. The child actually did put the box on the shelf. And so if you're focused on how they did it, you're also creating a tug of war that's unnecessary. And the child is probably doing that because they want a reaction from you. They're stomping and they're doing the most because guess what? They didn't want to put that damn box on the shelf. And they still did it though. They still did it. So you focus on the fact that they complied with you instead of the attitude. Now, it's one thing if they're popping off and saying stuff to you, then yes, I would address that. But if they're just 4 years old and they're like, stomping over and putting the box on the shelf, ignore them. Ignore that they did that because they still complied with you. So I know that's probably very touchy for some people and they probably mad in their feelings, but that's just the honest truth. And the likelihood of that child continuing to stomp and do all that extra shit is going to go down because you didn't react to it. It's the reaction that creates that behavior to continue because they're getting a reward, even though it's not a positive reward, even though it's you probably yelling at them or saying something, you're still rewarding that behavior because you're acknowledging it. So that's just a piece. I would love to hear your thoughts if you want to share. Let me read Pretty Kitty's comment. My family used shunning. That is also painfully devastating at a young age. Yes, it is. They literally ignored me or answered in short answers. Now I'm ultra sensitive. If anyone looks at me wrong, I'm crushed. Pretty Kitty, that is a very excellent point. That is the emotional abuse side of abuse. People think that just because they're not, and this is so good because I don't have this in my notes, but this is very excellent that she's bringing this up. Sometimes people think just because they're not putting their hands on their kids, they're still not causing harm. There are certain things that people do that is actually really devastating and damaging to children emotionally. And guess what? Those children become adults, and that affects the way we look and view at the world. Just like I talked about how if you use physical discipline, there's a risk that you can increase aggression and violence in that child. It's the same thing with the emotional abusive stuff. It can affect you and your relationship. So thank you, Pretty Kitty, for sharing that. So, those are some things to think about. Let's see where I am. Oh, I want to make this note also to say before we continue on with the techniques. If you are a foster parent, okay, I don't know I still have to learn a lot about the Canadian system, but I just follow a lot of the same rules. It's my understanding, like I said in my video on Saturday, if you're a foster parent, you're not supposed to physically discipline any kid, okay? If it's not your child, if it is not your adopted child or your biological child, you cannot use physical discipline on a foster child. And so what I recommend for foster parents is a couple things. If you have a child that has significant behavioral issues, a lot of times agencies will offer like behavioral techniques, classes, and things like that. Don't be prideful because you might be a parent of a certain age or you've raised other kids and you don't think you have anything to learn. Guess what, guys? Every kid is different. And especially kids who have suffered from trauma, you're going to have to learn a separate set of tools just to handle them. So don't feel incompetent or feel bad if you need extra support in the form of a parenting class, because a lot of times you have to use different techniques with those children because of what they've been through. And they tend to actually have more behavioral issues than kids who have not been removed because, as I stated earlier, there's a lot going on there. There's going to be attachment issues. There's going to be separation anxiety. There's going to be the trauma of just being away from their parents. So, and then the trauma of whatever they went through in their home of origin. So foster parents, utilize the services that are available to you. I had a lot of foster parents who they would be mandated to do stuff and they still didn't want to do it. And I didn't understand that, guys, because you're literally getting paid to have to take care of this child. And then some of the foster parents, they would get extra money if it was a child that had a significant trauma history. I forget the term that they used, but there were foster kids who had horrific trauma histories, or were just super vulnerable. And so those foster parents would be getting more money for those children, okay, because it's just a lot more, and it's a lot more things that they have to do. And a lot of times they have to take them to therapy. And I had quite a few foster parents who they made every excuse, under the sun, why they couldn't bring the child to therapy. And then I'm like, well, in my head, I'm like, why are you a foster parent? Like, if you didn't understand what it would take, okay, I'm gonna give you that. But some people, you can tell when it's just about a check, because they're not even doing the basic things. They're not even doing that. Everything is a chore for them. And so, I would say to foster parents, to the good ones, seek therapy. If you weren't mandated to do therapy, consider it as an option to help the child that's living with you. It can save you a lot of heartache and frustration, because some kids are very, very, very tough. And some kids, even though this is going to sound mean, guys, can make your life a living hell, depending on what their history is. And I notice a lot of foster parents, sometimes the foster agencies aren't really preparing them for the child that's coming to their home. They don't tell them, well, this child, was neglected, or this child was physically or sexually abused. They're not even telling them stuff. And then these foster parents are signing up for what they don't realize, right? So the other thing here is, if you're a foster parent, good morning, Ben Stinker. I see that you're going live soon, and I want to see that live. The other thing is that if you're a foster parent, do not use food as a punishment, okay? Now, I know a lot of us probably grew up where, you might be like, you're not getting no dessert, you're not getting this you're not getting an extra snack if you don't do this. If you're a foster parent, absolutely, under no circumstances should you use food as a punishment. And here's why. Because once again, that child might have had a history of neglect, okay? Just imagine if they weren't getting fed enough. And now you're using food as a punishment. You're adding to that child's trauma without really knowing that. You're adding to that child's trauma. You're triggering that child. Locking up food and things like that. Make sure that you have, I'm not saying they should have free access to food, because that's not realistic either or healthy. But these are things to think about. Don't use food as a punishment, even if it seems, like it's reasonable. Find other methods to discipline that child. Do not use food, because in most cases, it's just going to make things worse. I've worked with quite a few kids. One of the things that I noticed the most in kids who were neglected, that were foster kids, is there would be huge issues with food. And the foster parent would be complaining about how, they can't keep no food in the house, because the foster child is always hiding and eating food, or they're hiding and eating in the room, so then there's pests and things like that, or they just don't know when to stop. Those are all signs that a child was neglected. Like, I'm not saying in every case, because it could just be some kids that have poor impulse control, but if you have a foster child that's like that, you should definitely, if you don't know how to handle that, that's something you do want to get support for, because the things that you would do with your biological children may not work for that child. It may be causing worse things for them. So that's my little piece on foster parents. So we talked about ignoring, okay? Now let's talk about praise. Now, this might sound weird, but I think a lot of people, once again, because I've worked with so many Black families, when I go over some of these techniques, it's interesting to see initially how they respond. But then as they trust me and they do some of these things and they see that it does work, then they kind of like get disarmed a little bit. And they're like, okay, I guess she's making some sense. But praise is huge, guys. It may sound corny. You might be like, why do I need to thank my child for some shit they're supposed to do anyway? Don't be ignorant and learn stuff, because it can actually help you. When you're using praise, it could be so powerful. Okay, you don't got to go buy them extra toys and all this other stuff. That could be something, a reward too. But praise is free and it's good for everybody. It's good for the child and it's good for you. So the thing with praise is, to make it effective, is you want to make sure you're being specific about what you're praising the child for. So let's say that you told a child to clean their room. please go clean your room. And the child does it. Thank you so much for listening to me, or thank you for cleaning your room like I told you to do. Thank you for doing, thank you. And then make sure you tell them why you're thanking them. And the reason why that's important is because it's going to increase the likelihood that the child is going to repeat that behavior. Okay, so that the next time around when you ask them, they're going to go clean the room and you're going to get less tantrums or less issues because it feels good. They want your acceptance. Kids want your acceptance. But the thing with little kids is that they sometimes don't understand how to get it. So they will do I don't want to say bad behaviors, but they will engage in negative behaviors because it gets them the reaction fastest. They don't care if it's good or bad. They just want your attention. And so you have to teach them that you're going to get my attention when you're doing things that are positive. Okay. So that's something to use. One word that you might hear is labeled praises. This just means a specific type of praise. Or let's say they did something without you asking them. Praise them for it. Oh, thanks for helping me with dinner. Good job unpacking the dishwasher. I really like the way you did XYZ. All of those things, you say it in your own words, but it could be so powerful. And this is one of the skills that I teach parents. And it sounds so simple, but it goes such a long way because we can get trapped in negative patterns. Okay, we can get trapped in negative patterns, and it's easy to see the bad stuff. It's easy to see the stuff that annoys us. Oh, you didn't clean the kitchen good. Oh, you didn't do, try to find something to praise them for. And this also works with your partner, guys. Like if your partner, does something, do a specific praise and see how they respond to it. It really, really, it works. Okay. I use this on my husband all the time. Okay. Hey, Tiffany. Good morning, sis. Thank you. Happy Monday to you too. Thanks for being here. So labeled praises are the bomb.com. Hey, Sister Crystal. Thanks for being here. So I love using that. And it's like I said, it's free. The other thing is you can use positive rewards. So notice I start with things that did not involve anything physical. Ignoring behavior that is not dangerous or destructive and praising are very easy to use. Positive rewards. So some people like to do that. I'm starting with all the positive stuff because we're so conditioned to respond negatively. But if you bolster your parenting with positive things, it will help you and prevent you from having to use negative consequences a lot less. So positive rewards. So you can set up a chart if you want, and have something that they can work towards if they do their chores or something like that. And it doesn't always have to be you're going to buy them something. It could be, oh, we're going to have a special date at the park. It depends on how many kids you have because sometimes it's really hard. Or, we're going to have our own special playtime together. Or, we're going to go to the dollar store and you get to pick out one toy. But again, this isn't something you would use every day. It's something that they'd be working towards, and it has to be reasonable. Don't be putting like 11 things on the chart. So then the child gets deflated when it's not perfect. Make it reasonable. Choose one thing and then you focus on that for the week. So positive rewards can be very motivating for kids. And I think it works. The other thing is you can set house rules. So we're going to shift a little bit into the negative consequences. The negative doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just means sometimes you have to apply that pressure, So, you want to set clear house rules, but you don't want to get carried away with it. Don't have too many because make sure that I'm talking mostly about little kids here. Make sure that they learn and understand one or two of them at a time before you add new ones because it could be overwhelming. And then that way, if you have specific house rules, now when they do certain things that you don't approve of, it's not a surprise when they get a consequence, right? It's not going to be a surprise. So that's one thing. You can take things away. Now, my tip about taking things away is if you go ham and you take away all your baby's toys after they did one thing, you're now out of options, okay? If it's 9:00 and your child made you so mad that you took away all their toys for the rest of the day, what the hell are you going to do the rest of the day if they cut up again? You don't have any other options. So start small, don't take away large things unless, again, if this is an older child and you need to. And if you do take away something significant for the whole day, then there needs to be a clear path of how they're going to get that back, right? If you're taking away, if your child is 7 or 8 and you're taking something away for like a whole week, they're gonna forget about it after 2 days. I promise you. They're gonna forget about it. And guess what? If they forget about it, it no longer matters and they're more likely to act up again. So you don't want to take something away for too long because it's not effective. The other thing is you want to make sure you're doing it right away. If your child does something and you're implementing a consequence that is negative, you need to make sure it's as soon as possible. If they did something last week and you try to punish them for something, today that they did last week, that's not really effective. I'm not saying you should let them get away with stuff, but you just have to think about how effective is it going to be, unless it's an older child, unless you have a teenager and you found out they snuck out and, went to their friend's house in the middle of the night. Okay, yes, you're going to get a consequence for that. They're old enough to understand it. But if it's a little kid and you found out that they had crackers under their bed from last week, just talk to them. Because if you issue a consequence, it's probably not going to be that effective. So that's something that I would say. The other thing is, this is a no-brainer, but people forget. Sometimes we work so hard as adults that, yes, I'm about to read Tiffany's comment. Sometimes we work so hard as adults that we forget that you have to spend quality time with your kids. And quality time doesn't mean you have to take them to big things like Six Flags and, all this other stuff. And it just means you can sit and play with them. And some of us, we don't know that because maybe we might not have had that growing up, right? And that's important to there's so much research on play and how it helps kids' minds develop, not just with each other, but with their caregivers and things like that. So spend time with your kids playing. You can play a game, not just sitting in front of a screen. Like when you're it's still quality time, but it's not the same as doing something face to face or reading a book together or playing Play-Doh. It also brings out your inner kid, right? If you sit and do certain things with your kids, becoming a play therapist was one of the best things I ever did because it helped me to heal my inner child in ways that I didn't realize. That's not why I wanted to do it, but I was like, man, I get to play with kids. We get to play Play-Doh, we get to do Legos, and then I listen to them and it makes it easier for them to talk. So I would really encourage making sure you have time to play with your kids, especially if they're a certain age. Everything is not about money. Sometimes, especially in the Black community, we think we got to buy them a bunch of stuff, and that's nice, but quality time is way more valuable, than making sure they have the freshest pair of Jordans. I'm just saying it works. So let's read some of these comments before I go on. Tiffany said, great advice. Thanks, Tiffany. If you haven't heard of her, I think you'd like Dr. Stacey Patton's work. She's written at length about discipline in the Black community. Yes, let me write this down. Thank you. Tiffany is always dropping that knowledge. Let me just get my little notebook here. Dr. Stacey Patterson. Thank you, Tiffany. I'm going to check her out. So let's see. I'm going to read this. Sister Crystal said, true quality time with our children is very important. And yes, it is. Yes, it is. You just can't put a price tag on that, right? And it goes, do you know sometimes kids are acting out because they just want to spend time with you? Now, there's times that you can't. You might be busy. You might need to get things done. But if you notice an increase in their behavior, sometimes instead of issuing a consequence, it's actually more effective to be like, you know what, even though you might be so angry with them, set up a hangout with them, take them to the park and see how it affects their behavior. Andrea says, not caught up yet, but these tips are so good, Pressure. Can you write them in the description box? Absolutely, Andrea. I will do that. That's a good idea. I should do that so that people can, let me just write that down. I got to write down a lot of things so I can remember. Description. I will definitely do that. Okay. And then Sister Crystal says, it does matter how tired you are. A child will make sure you'll spend time with them, even if you get on their nerves. It's true. It's true. They would rather you be annoyed and still play with them. But guess what? They get to spend time with you. It doesn't matter. They just want to be with you. And I think we forget that, right? We forget how important that is. The other thing I love about working with kids is, as adults, we could be so petty. But whenever things would happen in the therapy room, let's say, a child was acting up significantly, I try to avoid even having to do consequences because it's a therapeutic relationship. But sometimes you have to. If they're doing things that are dangerous or inappropriate, then you have to set boundaries. And sometimes you have to set certain boundaries. And then they might be really angry with me in that session. By the next session, they're back. They don't give a crap. They're just like, hey, Miss Tamar, can we play with the Legos? They don't give a shit. And that just teaches me, because we could be so petty as adults. We just like sit and hold grudges and stew. And most kids, not all of them, but most kids, they forget very quickly, or it doesn't matter to them. They just want to, they want to spend time with you again, unless you did something to significantly hurt or scare them. So Tiffany said, quality time and cultivating healthy bonds are def key. Can't throw money and material things at kids while they're still emotionally abusing and neglecting them. Amen, Tiffany. You are spot on. Exactly. Absolutely. You are spot on. Right there. See, Ben Schinker is like that part. Okay. She's absolutely right. Oh, shoot. This always happens to me. My computer. Let me just plug in real quick so I don't lose y'all. Okay, we're good. My computer is disrespectful. It once it comes on and it says your battery is low, it's gone. It's dead. So I have very short windows. So those are excellent points, guys. Let me see if there's anything else I have on here. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the infamous timeout. Dun dun dun. Okay, Ben Stinker said 100. Andrea said I'm caught up. Thankful for yes, Andrea. That's impressive, Andrea. My mind is too like all over the place to do it. I've tried that with other content creators, and I'm like, okay, either I'm going to start at the beginning while they're still live and then catch up, or just watch them and then go back, because I got to say, that's very impressive. Okay, so timeout. We're going to talk about timeout. Now, the tips I'm going to give you for timeout are actually pulled from a specific type of therapy called parent-child interaction therapy. And the way they do timeout is very specific. I'm not going to go into all of it because some of it is extra and you need a certain setting for it, but I'm going to try to give you tips that will be helpful. Now, a lot of people kind of turn their noses up when it comes to timeout. They're like, it doesn't work, and all this other stuff. So once again, you have to find what works for you, but timeout does work if you stick to it. If you do it a certain way, it's effective. The other thing I would say is do not use timeout if your child is over 7. You're going to lose. It only works for younger kids. Yes, Andrea, timeout is excellent. And or if you do use it past a certain age, it's going to look different. It needs to look like, it might be you sending them to their room, but I'm talking about timeout on a timeout chair for little kids. This one's for little kids. So what makes it effective is, first, you want to make sure you're being very clear about what you told them to do, right? If you tell them to do something, you need to make sure it's very clear and it's not confusing or vague. And then if they don't do it, you say it again another time, not 500 times, not 15 times, not a bunch of threats. If you don't do this, I'm gonna beat your ass, or, don't do all of that. Say it once and then you give a warning and that's it. And if they don't do it, then they go to timeout. When you do timeout, okay, you are not going off into 2 other rooms to give them timeout. What makes it effective, that's why this is for little kids, right? If you might use a different version with your kids, if they're older, that's fine. But this I'm talking about is for little kids. If you leave a little kid on a timeout chair, most of the times they're going to get off the chair. Or if you put them in a timeout chair in their playroom, they're going to play with toys. Timeout is supposed to be not fun for them, okay? It's supposed to, because it's having them sit, and even though you are there, it's not supposed to be enjoyable, right? It's not supposed, we don't want them to be miserable, but it's not supposed to be enjoyable. So you are not going to be talking to them. And by that, I don't mean like in a nasty way. Just you're going to tell them you need to sit on the chair for X amount of time. And then that's it. When the time's up, you get them out. You shouldn't be, like I said, doing something else, because you need to sit there with them. That's why you only make it short. Make it 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then they're done. You should not be, if you're ignoring them, you shouldn't be saying things like, I'm ignoring you. That's not really ignoring a child, or, stop doing this, stop doing that. Just, they're going to try to engage you, because again, the whole point is this is time away. Even though you're still in the room, it's time away from spending time with you. So the whole point is you want them to understand what they did wrong. That's the other thing. Timeout is only effective if they understand why they're getting a timeout. If you just are in a bad mood, they get on your nerves, and you just send them to timeout, that's not going to be effective. I promise you, it's not. So make sure it's time limited. Make sure you're in the room. Make sure there's not a whole bunch of fun stuff for them. Don't if you send them to timeout in the room, a lot of parents do that, but it's not as effective. I'm just going to tell you, unless it's an older child, it's not as effective. So make sure you're with them. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Then when it's time for them to get off the chair, you remind them why they were in timeout, so that it drives home, this is why you were in timeout. Now, this is where I would have a lot of kids screaming bloody murder, because we would practice this, right, in session with parents. I would like teach them a set of skills, and then we would do the timeout. And I found that timeout was really hard for a lot of parents. It's very hard because your kid could be crying. They could be screaming bloody murder, even though you're not touching them. It's very heartbreaking for a lot of parents. So that's something you have to get used to. But the cool thing about timeout is if you do it effectively, you don't have to do it as often, because they're not going to like it. They're not going to like it at all. And so that's just something to think about. There's a lot more stuff that goes with that, but I'm not gonna get into it. I'm gonna read comments, and while I read comments, if you guys have questions, please post them in the chat so that I can answer them for you to the best of my ability. And I'm gonna read these. Andrea said, I like using timeout. I think timeout is very effective. There's a lot of haters. You might be one of them in the chat. I don't know. But timeout does work. I've seen it work. Okay. I've seen some kids come in and I'm like, oh, Lord. Yeah. Oh, it's for white kids. Exactly. That's what I was thinking, Sister Crystal. And I didn't want to say it. That's exactly what I was thinking. A lot of Black parents that I work with, they'd be like, time out, girl. That's why I don't tell them in that type of therapy that I did. I don't tell them that we're going to do timeout in phase 2, because they would just be like, oh, this is a joke. This is a joke. Timeout was not timeout from getting your butt whooped. Okay. Yeah. My grandkids, especially the 3-year-old, acts offended when I sit their tail down the timer. Andrea knows that is exactly what I'm talking about right there. That is exactly what I'm talking about. And that's the thing, because they don't like that. They just want to be with you. So those 3 minutes or that timer, ooh, child, they don't want that at all. So that's why it's effective. She's on point. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Tiffany said, I'm supposed to keep my 5-year-old niece later this month when her mother goes out of town. Uh-oh, let me pay attention. Those are like the best age, because they can act up and seem like little terrorists, but they're also a really fun age, and they're really sweet, and they love to play. And, they really just want to be with you a lot. And so that's why this is effective. That's the other thing I will say. It will work if you have that relationship with the child, right? Like if you're an auntie, if you're a parent, a grandparent, it will work if you have that relationship. If you don't have that relationship, unless you're dealing with a child that's super compliant, it might not work, because they're going to get up out the chair a lot. And then, we have a specific way that we deal with that. But, there's a lot of things that they're going to do. They're going to test you. One thing you have to know about little kids, man, they will test the hell out of you. And some people they don't know that, and they take it personal. So yes, part of it is, it's just them trying to see how far they can go. That's part of their development, is testing limits. And you have to teach them what those limits are. And so Sunkissed by TMH said, timeout does work. Thank you. Okay, good. I have some timeout believers here, because a lot of people are like, timeout is a joke. It's not if you do it right. My adult son says he would have rather have got a whipping. He's an extrovert. He's the father of a 3-year-old. See, exactly. That's what I'm saying. I'm telling you guys. Why am I echoing? Hold on 1 second, guys. Let me Okay, I'm back. Can you guys hear me? It was weird. That was kind of creepy. I think YouTube opened up a second. I don't know how it opened up a second browser because I'm on the same browser. That was so creepy. I was like, why is there echo? I don't have my phone on. Anyway, sorry about that. But yes, it is pure torture. Okay, it is pure torture to be in timeout when you're a little kid. Some people will be like, I'll just take the spanking. Andrea said, question, I don't let them start the timeout until they stop crying, right or wrong. Yes, Andrea, you're next level. Absolutely. That is a very, very good point. That's a pro tip. Yes. And the reason why that is a good thing to do is they really should be quiet when they're in timeout because timeout doesn't end until you can be calm. So if you are doing a bunch of screaming, this is the type of specific timeout we do. If you're doing a bunch of screaming before timeout starts, some parents will not start it until they calm down. And then to get out of timeout, even if the timer goes off, if you're still doing a whole bunch of extra stuff, they might end up being there for another extra couple minutes because you're not showing that you're ready, to be out of timeout. So yes, hopefully I answered that well. Absolutely, Andre, you're spot on. Sister Crystal said, I'm guilty. I'm taking notes because I thought timeout was a joke. Listen, I'm going to be honest with you guys. Before I got trained in that type of therapy, I definitely thought it was a joke. I was like, that's for the white children. I was like, that don't work. And then I felt ignorant because I was like, oh, shoot. And then I had to teach it to parents. And then I saw it play out so many times. I'm going to say, excuse me, for a PCIT, that's the type of therapy that I did. I'm trying to think if I had any kids. Every single kid I did that with, it works. The only variation is some kids act out more than others. So I had a family, guys. Now, hopefully it's not gross, but I had a family. This little boy was so extra. He was so extra. She warned me before we got to timeout. She said, Tamar, he's probably going to throw up so he can avoid going to timeout. Because she says sometimes when he gets so upset at home, he does that as a last ditch effort to get out of whatever it is that they want him to do. And I was like, wow, that's a lot to put your body through. And so I said, do you mean pretend throw up or like throw up for real? And then she was like, no, real throw up. And I was like, Lord of mercy. And then I said, okay, is it because he's so anxious and working himself up? She was like, no, he makes himself throw up. And I was like, I've never heard that before. So I had to talk to my supervisor before we got to the timeout portion of that therapy. And then they were like, here you go. Here's the powder, whatever that powder is, child. I was like, Lord. So some things, there's always challenging things. But guess what? I was terrified. Now, I'm not going to let the parent know that. I was terrified of getting to phase 2 to do timeout with that child because I was like, I can't do throw up, guys. I can do other stuff, but I was like, I can't do throw up. I don't know what it is. Throw up is like messes with me. And I was like, damn it. I was like, this little boy is going to act up and he's probably going to break shit. And there's just a lot of things that we have to put into place to like, I never heard of that before. I've heard of kids getting nauseous or even adults. Sometimes when you get, some people have such bad anxiety that they feel nauseous or they might actually throw up. But this little boy was making himself throw up. I said, what is going on around here? But he never did. He didn't, guys. He didn't. By the time we got to that point in therapy, he didn't even try. Sister Crystal, you about to go to timeout. Yo, oh my gosh, I can't even see right now because I'm crying. Sister Crystal, between you and Tiffany. So yeah, he never did it. And I said, thank you, Jesus. I really thought I was going to have to deal with throw up, guys. But he didn't, because you have to be prepared for everything. Because like some kids like I said, limit testing. Some limit testing is just going to be crying. Or I have other kids who, they would be screaming bloody murder. You would think, guys, that something horrific was happening to them when they're in the timeout chair. They are screaming bloody murder. And then because when they realize, when we're in the therapy room, that doesn't stop them from being in timeout, I tell you what, it goes away. They do it one time. You might have one bad session of timeout where timeout is like 30 minutes because they don't stop screaming or doing stuff. And the next time it doesn't happen again. So I've never had a family where the timeout doesn't work for the child, because if you're doing it correctly, that's part of why we're modeling it in therapy first. If you're doing it correctly, then it'll work. The problem is sometimes parents will feel they might not feel confident, or they might get frustrated and they skip steps, and then that's when it gets messy, and that's when it won't work. So that's what I have to say about timeout. I think this is all I have. We talked about, I already talked about that, like the effects of slavery and things like that. Yeah, guys, I will make sure I have this typed up in the description. Are there any last questions? I'll give you guys, a moment to figure that out. But I'm just looking through here. Sister Crystal said, I know that was scary. Did you have gloves? Hell yes, Sister Crystal and Max. Well, here's the cool thing about that therapy. I'm in another room and I'm like coaching them. But if something goes down, then I have to go into that room. So I had that powder ready, whatever that powder was, I had that ready, and gloves and paper towels. And thank God he never did it. He never did it. I was like, I can't do it. Ben Schinker said, pressure, how should one handle a teen expressing suicide ideation? Wow, Benj, that is heavy. That's a very good question, though. So I'm going to try to answer this the best that I can. It depends on, the first thing you want to do is, are they only expressing, not that you should ignore it or it's not a concern, is the teen only expressing a desire that they don't want to be here anymore, or that they want to commit suicide, but do they have a plan? If they have a plan, immediately, I think you have to try your best to get them some help, like either to get evaluated at a hospital, because those teens or people in general are going to be at a higher risk for trying suicide or completing suicide. So in my work, whenever I would have a teen who just said, I don't want to be here, or, I wish I was dead, or I want to kill myself, I wouldn't always necessarily go to the next step. We would talk it through, and we would talk about coping tools or protective factors, like, reasons why they want to be here. Find out, do they have anything to live for? Like, even if it's a pet, for some kids, it might not be a person. It could be a pet. They don't want to commit suicide because they really love their pet. Their pet does a lot for them. So try to get them to identify a person or an animal. But if they have a clear plan, then I would say for sure you want to go ahead and try to see if you can get them to the hospital, or encourage them to go to the hospital. Tell their parent, depending on what capacity you're working with them. If you're in a school, you definitely want to get extra help, because whenever people have a plan, it's just the risk is a lot higher. And I'm going to say this before I read the other comments. This has been one of my frustrations about doing this type of work in Canada. It is like in the States, when I would work with clients, if they expressed, or if they attempted, sometimes people will actually have attempted suicide. And, they're fine. And then if they're still suicidal, then it would be easy to get them hospitalized in the States, right? Sometimes people will be mad at you, but my thing is, if you're alive, I'd rather you be mad at me and alive than you're dead, okay? And, but in Canada, so far, you're welcome, Ben Schinker. In Canada, I've had kids who have told me stories that they go to the damn hospital. It's just very hard to get admitted. I don't know if there's just not enough beds, and they just send them home. The one girl, she had cut her wrist, and I'm not talking about just cutting where people, there are people who cut, and it's not because they're trying to kill themselves. They're trying to have an emotional release, and it's still unhealthy, but they're not trying to kill themselves. This girl slit her wrist, excuse me, went to the hospital. Her mom took her to the hospital, and her mom was there, so she wasn't lying. And, they evaluated her and sent her home. And I'm thinking, like, that girl could have easily killed herself. Thank God she didn't, but she could have easily went home and completed suicide. Like that, some hospitals are not very good and at evaluating that kind of stuff. But I live in like a small rural area, so there's not a lot of resources. So I think that's part of it. They don't hospitalize people And hospitalization, for some people, it's traumatic, but if you're truly suicidal, it could save your life for real. So hopefully that helps. Thanks, Mitch. That was an excellent question. Tiffany said this was great info, even for those of us who aren't parents but are around children in our families or places of employment. Exactly, Tiffany. And I'm one of those people. I don't have kids yet, but this information has helped me so much. It helped me also to know how to relate to kids more. And I learned a lot of things from my clients and stuff. And first they don't trust me because they're like, you're not even a parent. And then they realize like, oh no, this is like really helpful. This actually works, So thank you so much for saying that. Sister Crystal said, yes, this was great information. Thanks, Pressure Cooker, and great questions, everyone. Yes, excellent questions. Thank you guys for being here with me. I thought this was going to be one of those lives where I only have like 2 people. There was somebody that's been here since the beginning. Shout out to you. Thank you for being here and being willing to be the only one in the chat for a little bit. You guys are amazing. I really love doing this, and I love talking with you guys. I hope you have a fantabulous Monday. Love you all. I'm sending you good vibes. And yes, I will get on it. I will get on writing the things up in the description box. If you have any questions, you can always put them under the video. Bench Thinker, Tiffany says, my place of employment provides equine. Oh, that's amazing. Equine assisted therapy, psychotherapy, and it does wonders for children and teens who come in. Tiffany, you are so lucky. I wish I had that. I wish I could send like some of my kids that I work with to something like that. I've heard so many amazing things about equine therapy. That's powerful. Man, I wish I had that. Thank you, Andrea. You too, love. All right, guys. You have a super awesome day. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Oh, the last thing, book club. Let me know under the video if you want me to resume book club. I can do an uploaded video because the last time I did book club, people didn't really come. But I've been asking, like Indigo asked about book club. So I think what I might do is I may do it, but instead of going live till I get more people, I will just upload the video. So let me know if that's something you're interested in, and I will get back to the video we were doing. Yes! Andrea said she ordered the Queen of Food book. Oh my gosh. Okay, we may have to do that next. I'll upload a video for the last book, and then we're gonna have to get into Queen of Food. I'm so excited. All right. Bye, y'all. Take care.